Hello and welcome to Badger Talks Live Family Weekend Edition, connecting parents and families to the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I am Deja Mason, a 2017 graduate of the Wisconsin School of Business, currently pursuing my master's degree in Arts and Creative Enterprise Leadership from the Bolz Center for Arts Administration located in the Wisconsin School of Business. Today, we will be hearing from Interim Co-Director for the Bolz Center, Sarah Marty, who will be talking about the Broadway blockbuster Hamilton, an American Musical. This cultural phenomena has appealed to a diverse audience far beyond the borders of New York City. The success of the show is changing what theater is being produced, what stories are being told, and who is telling them. Being one of Sarah's students, I can tell you that her love for the arts and creating inclusive spaces is a major part of the work that she does and continues to exemplify. Sarah Marty also teaches classes on arts entrepreneurship and arts leadership for the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Through her work as co-director of the Holding History program, she mentors students as they connect the history of media to the arts and crafts of bookmaking. As producing artistic director of Four Seasons Theater in Madison, she helps bring musical theater performances to the stages, libraries, and retirement communities across Madison, Wisconsin. Please welcome Sarah Marty.
Thank you, Deja, for that lovely, lovely introduction. And thank you to Monica for the invitation to speak today as part of Badger Talks Live Family Weekend program. Over these past few months, I've so enjoyed being able to tune in live and check out talks that I missed on YouTube and to learn about new and interesting things and see the Wisconsin idea in action through the UW Connects series. My talk today is about 20 minutes long, so there'll be plenty of time for questions afterwards. You're welcome to put your questions in the chat bar at any time, and we'll save those for the discussion at the end. In today's talk, we're going to focus on two questions about Hamilton. The first question is, what's the big deal? And the second is, why is it so popular, and why does it matter? Why do we care? Why does everybody talk about Hamilton a lot? So thank you so much for being here today. Let's get started. In the next few minutes together, we'll focus on the groundbreaking Broadway and cultural phenomenon, Hamilton, an American Musical, and its genius creator, MacArthur Fellow Lin Manuel Miranda. Fusing classical musical theater and poetry with pop music and hip hop, Hamilton exemplifies the highest excellence in the genre and is changing the very nature of the art form. What stories are being told and who is telling them. In a 2016 article for The Guardian, Public Humanities and Literature fellow Sarah Churchwell wrote, Hamilton is a kind of transformative theatrical experience that only happens a few times in the history of American musicals. It joins the likes of Showboat, Oklahoma, and West Side Story as game changers, innovative productions that forever redefined what came after them. It's a bold claim, to be sure, and one that is proven to be true on a multitude of levels. First, the show is a masterpiece of musical theater and the 14 plus art forms that it includes: music, lyrics, dance, orchestration, staging, costume design, lighting design, scenic design, prop design, theater technology, and so many more. Second, Hamilton's an entire industry with ripple effects that go far beyond the footlights of Broadway. It's inspired exhibitions and programs at libraries and museums and historical sites across the country. Third, it's inspired generations from elementary school students to lifelong learners to learn more about American history, to go beyond what our textbooks told us, to read primary sources, to listen, to learn, and to examine. Fourth, it's a financial blockbuster that, before the current pandemic, played to packed houses in New York City and London, and also supported 4 national touring companies performing in art centers across North America. And right now, I'm sure it's still breaking streaming records for Disney+. Fifth, it's a conversation-sparking artwork permeated with social commentary on the foundation of the nation and how the process of democracy was just as fraught then as it is now. And finally, perhaps the greatest impact of all, it challenges us to think differently about history and legacy on both a personal level and as Americans, and to ask who lives, who dies, and who tells your story. During Hamilton's first year, Lin Manuel Miranda, the composer, librettist, and performer, appeared in countless print and digital publications, and was interviewed by major radio and television programs across the world. He was everywhere, and often in places you're more likely to see the CEO of a Fortune 500 company or a blockbuster movie star. How many Broadway artists end up on the cover of Rolling Stone, Time Magazine, Smithsonian Magazine, and GQ all in the same year? Couple this widespread exposure with the concurrent growth of social media platforms, in particular Twitter, and its creators' collective leverage of their personal Twitter accounts, and Hamilton quickly surpassed the reach of any prior theatrical production. Children dressed as historical figures and characters from the show for Halloween, and my then 87-year-old grandmother, who lives on our home farm in Monticello, Wisconsin, asked me if I knew anything about this Lin Manuel Miranda guy because she'd seen him on CBS Sunday Morning. Now, part of Miranda's genius is that he's an astute business person and is a better public relations spokesperson and marketer than most who hold those titles at big businesses. As a storyteller, he knows how to reach an audience and how to engage with and build his fan base. On May 12, 2009, Miranda was invited to perform music from In the Heights for the White House Evening of Poetry, Music, and Spoken Word, the first ever such event hosted in the White House, and one that was conceived by and hosted by President Barack Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama. Instead of performing a song from In the Heights, he performed the first song from the Hamilton mixtape, which was an early version of what would later become an actual show. And this song was an early version of the song Alexander Hamilton, which is the opening number in the musical. I'm sure many of you have seen this video. He's really nervous. The audience giggles when he mentions he's writing a song, an album of a song who embodies hip hop, Alexander Hamilton. It's a brilliant move. And at the time, it's the only song he had written that here on a national stage at that event, he took the risk of proof of concept, knowing it would build interest in the new project. In the 6 years that Hamilton evolved from that single song into a song cycle or an album called the mixtape, and into a complex, beautiful theatrical production blockbuster on stage, Hamilton, an American Musical, Lin shared every moment of that process with his fans via his prolific Twitter account. Whether he was agonizing over a lyric or sharing his excitement of working on a new moment in the show with director Thomas Kail, or waking up in the middle of the night with a new idea, he invited everyone into the process. His dream project became our dream project. And in doing so, he built momentum and interest, which led to funding and a guaranteed audience for at least the eventual off-Broadway production. Beyond that, he had this uncanny ability to remain earnest and genuine in every interview, and to make you as the listener feel like everything he said was the first time he had thought or spoke that very thought. In reality, while he was genuinely excited to share everything he could about Hamilton, he was also very shrewd and stuck to talking points that resonated. My favorite is, quote, "Hamilton is a story of America then, told by America now," unquote. We'll come back to that later. He shared in many interviews how he recognized the parallels between the story of Alexander Hamilton and Manuel Miranda's own father's story of immigrating from Puerto Rico to New York City. His interviews are a masterclass for nonprofit leaders, chancellors at universities, social entrepreneurs, community leaders, on how to talk about your mission-driven work in a compelling way that engages with your audience. The success of Hamilton, the Grammy Award-winning cast album, the Pulitzer Prize for Drama, the Tony Awards, and being embraced by contemporary popular culture and multiple generations is lightning in a bottle. It's a phenomenon that we will never see again. So why is Hamilton so popular? The Venn diagram of the Hamilton audience is very unusual, as the show brings together musical theater fans, hip hop music fans, hip hop dance fans, and history buffs. So it's a very interesting intersection of who's in the audience for this particular production when it's able to be in theaters and also when it's at home on your screen for Disney Plus. When I first saw Hamilton, I had no idea what to expect. I am not a big fan of hip hop music. I had not seen In the Heights. And the musical, Hamilton, American Musical, was billed as, quote, a hip hop musical, unquote. And that, quite frankly, as someone who enjoys traditional musical theater, that didn't really appeal to me as an audience member. But my close friend's aunt was a subscriber at the Public Theater, and she gave us tickets to the February 18th, 2015 performance. This is within the first few weeks of Hamilton opening off Broadway in New York. And that off-Broadway production was in a space called the Newman Theater in the Public Theater complex. It's this amazing venue. If you can imagine a typical large theater with maybe 900, 1,000 seats, how big that stage is, that big proscenium stage. But then there were only 299 seats. Think about that. Only 299 people at each performance for a show that took nearly 100 people to run. 21 people on stage as actors, swings on standby, wardrobe and run crew, waiting off stage, light board and turntable operators, stage managers calling the show, and then all the people working front of house. So over 100 people every single show just to make it happen, but only 299 of us in the audience for off-Broadway. At the time when I saw Hamilton, there weren't many photos. There was no video available. There wasn't a trailer. All we had was that 2009 video of Lin singing a version of the opening song. And the opening number, Alexander Hamilton, literally blew me away. It was like the first time that I saw the 1961 film of West Side Story. I know many high school students, even today, still read Romeo and Juliet in high school English class and get a chance then to see the 1957 musical, 1961 film of West Side Story. And for a lot of students, that might be the first time they're exposed to musical theater. I know it was for me as a high school student growing up in Monticello, Wisconsin. West Side Story is unique and was a game changer as it was a complex, fully artistically integrated story where no one element was more important than the other. The music, the choreography, the staging were all integrated seamlessly, and the lighting and costumes and scenic elements fully supported all of the storytelling that was being told. You know, the parallels between West Side Story and Hamilton are plentiful, as the creators of Hamilton are steeped in musical theater, both as fans of the genre and as people who participated in it in their high school and college experiences and training. Also, West Side Story was co-created by a collaborative team. Leonard Bernstein wrote the music, Arthur Lawrence wrote the script, Jerome Robbins was in charge of choreography, and Stephen Sondheim wrote many of the lyrics. It was a game changer in the genre as it fully integrated all those elements in the way the story was told, and it was about a contemporary story. It wasn't about something that happened many, many years ago. At the time when West Side Story was written, it was about New York City then, about the conflicts between immigrant groups, Polish and Puerto Rican, and the fight for power. I could go on, but that's another lecture for another time. And maybe I'll see some of you in one of my classrooms in the future and we can talk all about that. As the opening number of Hamilton concluded, I was also struck by the fact that Hamilton was very much like the prologue of West Side Story, which is the prologue of Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare, because West Side Story is a contemporary retelling of that particular play. And Shakespeare, when we say the word Shakespeare, we think of one of the greatest poets and playwrights that ever walked the earth or wrote on a page, right? And when we think about Romeo and Juliet in that prologue, we learn the entire story of the whole entire play, the whole story, in the first few minutes, but we stick around to see how does it unfold? Why does it happen? So with that in mind, I'm going to take a short detour for my Shakespeare fans who are here with us today and talk about those who love theater and poetry and stories about history and how Shakespeare and Lin Manuel Miranda have a lot in common. So Shakespeare's plays, hip hop lyrics and Hamilton were all written as spoken word, something that was meant to be spoken out loud, to be experienced through a performance first, through speaking and vocalization, and not as something that is simply read on a printed page. You know, oddly enough, most high school students first encounter Shakespeare by being required to read a play in English class, even though audiences during Shakespeare's lifetime were much more likely to see a performance on stage, to hear the words, and share a communal theatrical experience than to ever have the opportunity to own and read a copy of the script. Oscar Eustis, who's the artistic director at New York City's Public Theater, the organization that produced the final year of workshops and the off-Broadway run for Hamilton, an American Musical, explained how, like Shakespeare, Lin Manuel Miranda took the language of the people and elevated it to art. Quote, in Shakespeare's case, he elevated it to iambic pentameter. In Lin Manuel's case, he elevated it to hip hop and rap, and he ennobled it by turning it into verse and putting it at the center of the stage. That's exactly what Shakespeare was doing. End quote. Shakespeare, like Miranda, was a champion of successful storytelling through verse, and the comparisons don't stop there. In my work at UW-Madison, I'm co-director of the Holding History program, which introduces rare book archives and special collections to students and community members. In this work with my colleague and co-director Josh Calhoun, and in my own research as an academic, I've had the chance to work with quite a few primary source documents and materials. So primary sources are letters and charges and missives and maps and photos and pictures and paintings, things that are from the time the event happened, as opposed to somebody creating a textbook that tells you what they all mean. Primary source, you're looking at that actual document. Shakespeare's plays and his great tragedies like Hamlet and Macbeth are adaptations of Holinshed's Chronicles of England, Scotland, and Ireland, a comprehensive history, in quotes, of Britain that was originally published in 1577 and revised in 1587. Shakespeare took the stories that had been printed and shared and read by many and adapted them for the theatrical stage as history plays, much like Lin Manuel Miranda took the 700+ page book by Ron Chernow, which was itself based on thousands and thousands of primary source materials and the work of many other scholars, and adapted that Chernow distillation of history into the structure of a 2.5-hour musical. We often associate the term remix with hip hop culture, with sampling bass tracks or musical lyrics or just a few measures of a melody and using them to create a new song. But we can also think of the work of Shakespeare and of Lin Manuel Miranda as remixes of the work of others. With both Shakespeare and Miranda, the genius is not in the story that's being told. They're not necessarily original stories. The genius is how they're telling those stories, how they tell them. And in Lin's case, the genius is that he's bringing together so many disparate sources, so dissimilar sources. The book by Chernow, his love of the music of his youth, 1990s hip hop, and his love of listening to, performing in, and writing musical theater. Finally, one of the greatest similarities between William Shakespeare and Lin Manuel Miranda is the ability to address the history of a nation through the eyes of a central individual's experience, to see drama in that epic sweep of history, the violence of war and the battle for power, and also in the most human emotions and experiences. From the most important personal flight or plight, the struggle for love or unrequited love or lost love, to kingdoms rising and falling and worlds hanging in the balance. He makes the huge and the epic personal for us all. So we've got this idea of remix, of sampling a variety of sources and bringing them together in a new work. And some of you might be wondering, how did this remix happen with Hamilton? Now, many people will attribute all of the success of Hamilton to one person, to Miranda, but he himself gives all of the credit, even though he wrote the book and the lyric and the music, he gives all of the credit to the cabinet. And I think this is another interesting parallel with West Side Story, because West Side Story was not the work of one person, it is the work of a whole team. And the musicals In the Heights and Hamilton are also both the work of a team. So part of Miranda's genius is his ability to bring together a creative team that is greater than the sum of its parts, that is comprised of similarly gifted individuals who are well-versed in a vast array of musical, theatrical, and dance styles. Like Alexander Hamilton with John Lorenz, Lafayette, and Hercules Mulligan, Lin Manuel Miranda has close aides and allies who are an integral part of the person he is and the work that he does. His band of brothers includes director Thomas Kail, music director and orchestrator Alex Lacamoire, and choreographer Andy Blankenbuehler. All grew up as fans of 1990s hip hop and maintain that enthusiasm for the genre while pursuing their studies in their individual fields. The quartet first collaborated on In the Heights, which was nominated for 13 Tony Awards in 2008 and won 4, including Best Musical, Best Original Score, Best Choreography, and Best Orchestrations. It was Lackamore and Cale who convinced Miranda that the Hamilton mixtape was much bigger than the original intent for the project, just an album about the life and times of Alexander Hamilton, and that it was in fact destined to be a fully staged musical theater production. And it was Blankenbuehler, whose incredible ability to tell the story through movement blended musical theater dance and hip hop dance and elevated Hamilton from a soundtrack to a piece of musical theater. Sharing this wide-ranging vocabulary of sound and lyrics, poetry and movement, and a deep curiosity in bringing together seemingly opposing genres is the spark that made Hamilton possible and sustained it over 6 years from an idea to opening night off Broadway at the Public Theater. The friendship and professional integrity with the cabinet provided the trust and creative energy that Miranda needed to write the book and music for the show and to get the financial backing needed to make a stage production possible. In November 2015, Hamilton did something no other Broadway musical had ever done. It hit #1 on the Billboard chart for rap albums. And in December 2018, the Kennedy Center Honors recognized the entire creative team with a special award for being, quote, trailblazing creators of a transformative work that defies category, end quote. So why does it matter? Why do we care? You've told us all these things about this show. Why does it matter? Ben Brantley wrote in the New York Times that Hamilton is, among other things, about who owns history and who gets to be in charge of the narrative. The financial success of Hamilton has significantly impacted the kind of work that producers are willing to invest in and has significantly impacted casting on Broadway. Yes, we were starting to see more diversity on stage and in the offerings that were produced, but Hamilton accelerated that shift. I'm going to pause for a moment and just share that the slide you're looking at on the left is the person, the real person, and on the right is the original Broadway cast member who portrayed that person in Hamilton the musical. So just making sure you know what you're seeing right now. The Public Theater, which workshopped and produced the off-Broadway production, is now on stable ground for decades to come and can use the money it's earned from Hamilton to invest in the support of new works, of new plays and new musicals. Beyond that, seeing more actors, composers, and artists of color succeed in the field reminds us of the actual overall demographics of our country. And seeing yourself on stage as a president, as a founding father, as the woman who founded the first public orphanage in the country can, as a young person, as an audience member, as an artist, have an immeasurable impact. Representation truly matters. While theater audiences may not yet be as diverse as the overall population of the country, the success of a show like Hamilton encourages us all to try something we're unfamiliar with, whether it's hip hop or it's musical theater. Since Hamilton opened off Broadway in 2015, research shows there's been a 130% increase in attendees ages 18 to 44. While, according to Broadway League, about 80% of Broadway ticket goers are white, the percentages of Black, Hispanic, and Asian theater goers has risen significantly over the last decade. Hamilton has also been groundbreaking in their EduHam program, making tens of thousands of tickets available to schools for the low price of $10 each through their partnership with the Gilder Lehrman Institute of American History to create an integrated educational curriculum for schools and children. So they're also working to expose young people to musical theater in a way that they may not have been before. And they're supporting teachers and parents in those efforts. As the stories that are told and the artists telling them continue to more accurately reflect the makeup of our country, this number will continue to grow. In closing, Hamilton, an American musical, is truly a work of genius and is an American remix. It combines musical theater, an American art form rooted in Western classical music, with hip hop, an American genre of music and culture that grew out of the expressive forms of African American and Caribbean immigrant artists in the Bronx in the 1980s. It's also both the story of the founding of the country and the revolution, and a vivid commentary on contemporary issues in America today. It both builds on the past and looks to the future. The opening number of the show features the entire cast in parchment-colored costumes. Blank sheets of paper, their stories untold, their character not yet revealed. Will they matter and will they be remembered? The hip-hop underdog story of Alexander Hamilton celebrates the idea of this land of opportunity while shining a spotlight on our history and our society then and now. Hamilton, an American Musical, challenges us to ask what stories have been told and celebrated, what stories and experiences have been left out, who has opportunity in our country, and who has the power to make the decisions that affect the allocation of resources in our communities: clean drinking water, quality educational systems, public transportation, healthcare for all, and quality for life. Hamilton, an American Musical, also shows us that politics have always been a complicated and dirty business. There have always been disagreements. There have always been differing of opinions, but the compromise is truly possible and can make a huge difference in what we look like as a country moving forward. Lin Manuel Miranda and his creative team of Hamilton worked collaboratively to make great art that not only tells the story of the founding of our country, but as a piece of social activism and commentary, also imagines a future where America and the diversity of its people are reflected not only on the stages of Broadway, but also in the cabinet of the White House and the seats of Congress. Perhaps the greatest impact of Hamilton is the reflection, the questions, and the conversations that it has inspired. What does it mean to be an American? What stories are told and who tells them? And to quote the closing lines of the musical, who lives, who dies, and who tells your story? Well, thank you so much for listening today. If you have any questions for us, feel free to put those in the chat bar right now, and we can take a few minutes to have a conversation. I'm hoping we have some Hamilton fans joining us at home today who may have a few thoughts and would like to be part of an ongoing conversation. So our first question says, you mentioned that Hamilton paved the way for a more diverse Broadway scene. How do you think this will translate to future or current Broadway productions? What a great question. So I would say the first piece of paving the way for change is just in casting. When we look at Hamilton, that season, The Color Purple was on Broadway. Hamilton was on Broadway. It was one of the first times we saw a big change in how a major musical, Les Mis, was cast. And by breaking people's implicit biases and perceptions of who can play a certain role, you're opening up casting in general with all plays and stories of who might be quote unquote eligible to play a role in a particular piece. So that's the first way. And then the second way that it's really changed what's being created is its creators were people of color. The majority of the cast are people of color. And when a production is incredibly popular and makes a lot of money, producers who may have been concerned that a show that was not predominantly a white story or white people on stage wouldn't make money, no longer are worried about that. So they're more willing to invest in diverse stories by diverse storytellers than they may have been in the past. So that's a big way we see that. So there was a question of how has Hamilton inspired audience members to learn more about history? What a fantastic question. I think the first piece is there's a lot of history in Hamilton. There also is some artistic license. It's impossible to take someone's life. Hamilton lived to be about 50 years old. The book that Chernow wrote was 700 plus pages, and to slam all that down into 2.5 hours is really difficult. But even in that 2.5 hours, there's so many things that happen that you read about, you hear about them in the show or in the lyrics, and you just think that can't be true. First case, the Reynolds pamphlet. So even though I worked with rare books and in the North American collection at the Wisconsin Historical Society, and I work at the Special Collections and Memorial Library on campus, I had never actually seen the Reynolds pamphlet. And I'm guessing that you, like me, might have assumed that a pamphlet might look kind of like, I don't know, like a greeting card, right? Like it's just, I would think a pamphlet is maybe a piece of paper. Maybe you open up, there's something inside. I went to the library to look at the Reynolds pamphlet, and it turns out it's a book. It's an actual book. It's about this thick. And it was a book of every single letter that Hamilton and Maria Reynolds Reynolds' husband had exchanged during the entire affair. It was an accounting of the entire story, and that's what was published. And I think that a lot of people, when they watch Hamilton, they get interested in learning more about some of the events. They want to learn more about some of the people. They go and read about Thomas Jefferson and learn about his very complex and conflicting history of someone who wrote about liberal ideals and freedom for all, but yet was a slaveholder who had a massive plantation. And as you dig into history and you learn more about the people and the stories in Hamilton, I think that's one of the biggest impacts. It's also something that's providing a bridge for teachers in the classroom to encourage students to use critical thinking and to do their own research and learn further as well. Has Hamilton influenced or changed my work at all since seeing it? What a fantastic question. Thank you for that. I wish I knew who was saying these because I'd make sure to say your name on air, but thank you. How has it influenced or changed my work since seeing it? It has 100%. I've always been a history buff, and I've always liked to read biographies and stories about. I'm particularly interested in the Victorian era. But I've also had the good fortune to be in Boston and to walk through many revolutionary sites at the time. But I never really connected that love of history with the fact that I work in musical theater, that I'm a musical theater producer, that I teach music, that I teach theater. And Hamilton kind of brought all of those things together in a new way for me. And it also challenged me as somebody who'd kind of been a little bit of a jerk about popular music. I probably sound like my grandpa, but I always felt like, oh, I don't need to listen to popular music. I know what I like. And it opened my ears up to more popular genres, to hip hop artists, to artists really from the last, 10, 15 years as well, in a way that I had not really paid attention previously. And it really, it really opened up my eyes to the incredible dexterity and talents of many students who are working in the First Wave program as spoken word artists, and the incredible skill that they have to be able to write and perform in that particular genre and art form. So it definitely widened my horizons, so to speak. Oh, here's a question from Stephanie. How can students who love Hamilton get involved at UW-Madison in either theater, music remixing, musical theater, or anything else related? What a great question, Stephanie. Well, there's so many things. There's so many ways. So for students who are interested in learning, either participating in or supporting and being an audience member for anything related to hip hop and to spoken word, at UW-Madison, there's a fantastic program called the First Wave program, which is in OMI, the Office of Multicultural Initiatives. And they have a huge, it's digital this year, but they've done this event many times, big event coming up the end of the month called Pass the Mic. So I'll see if I can make sure to get that, but just OMI, so OMAI, Pass the Mic. If you Google that, you can find that festival. It's going to be online, featuring lots of current students and recent graduates of UW-Madison. So that's a great way to kind of connect with the spoken word community on campus. I teach a class for the theater department in the summer, all about Hamilton. We have 3 credits, 8 weeks online. And post-pandemic, we also do a couple of sessions in the libraries. If you're someone who enjoys history, I recommend the Holding History program. And I also just want you to know that as a UW student, you have access to all of the archives on campus. You don't need a professor to give you permission to go there. If you want to go see the Reynolds pamphlets, if you would like to see a 1776 printing of the Declaration of Independence in the Philadelphia Gazette, you can do those. You can do those things as a student. You just need to email the librarians at the Wisconsin Historical Society and set up an appointment, and they can pull all those materials for you. And you're able to bring your parents with you if they'd like to see them as well. So those things are open for you too. And then I would also say the theater department does have some musical theater classes that they run throughout the year that are open to anybody on campus. You don't have to be a theater major or a music major to participate. So do watch for those opportunities and take advantage of them. It's really wonderful to be able to have those open to everybody on campus. Related to that question is one that says, how can students get into musical theater and playwriting like I do, or like Lin Manuel Miranda? And I think there's a couple of things. If you're interested in playwriting, the creative writing department has a fantastic professor. Her name is Jen Plants, Plants. She's phenomenal. For my theater company, Four Seasons, we've worked together on a couple of projects that are new plays including one about Anita Day, the great jazz artist. And Professor Plants teaches playwriting at UW-Madison within the creative writing department and starts really from scratch. And is just a phenomenal teacher, very supportive. That's a great way to get started if you're thinking about writing. The musical theater, I'd say the performance class. And then the other things that are not necessarily credit related are you have to steep yourself in the genre. So if you have Netflix or you have Disney Plus or Amazon Prime, there are so many musicals that are now available where you can see the Broadway cast performances from recent shows and from ones that are decades old. So watching and learning and paying attention and looking at the complexity of the storytelling, looking at the design elements, and just really familiarizing yourself with what is musical theater is a good place to start. And then I'd say just find a local company that's doing musicals and help out. It could be that you audition and want to be in the show. It could be you work backstage and do run crew. But really, the way I learned about theater was by doing theater. It was by working with the local children's theater company and with theater companies at our local, the Bartell Theater, which is a local venue, which has about 5 different companies. And I just kind of learned by doing and meeting people and asking, how do you do that? Or why are we doing that? Or why is that like that? Or can you tell me more about what that means? And just being curious and in a way sort of networking and building up my own knowledge by asking others who knew more, I would say. From Jenna, you guys have so many good questions. Thank you. How can we make learning about history in classes, which can be so dense and focused on dates, more interesting, like watching Hamilton? Oh, yeah, I know. Totally. Great question. Great question. I think what we can learn when I think about history, there is a real emphasis on dates and recitations. And really what we can learn from history is more about story and context and what was happening at the time. What were those forces? Thinking back to what I said about Shakespeare and Hamilton, where you have both the epic and the grand and also the individual and what's happening for that one person. And I think what brings history alive is being able to make history feel personal. So like when I work in the archives, I was part of a project a few years ago where my theater company partnered with the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. This is a really good one that you should all know about. The Wisconsin Veterans Museum digitized over 10,000 Civil War letters that are now available through the Historical Society website. So if you Google Civil War letters, Wisconsin Historical Society, you can access, and then you can sort and choose based on, is it from a soldier? Is it from a nurse? Is it from a parent? Maybe it's mother who's at home and the son is off to war. And you can literally pull up these letters and read someone telling their mom what it was like to be on the battlefield and to see their first battle. You can read a young man complaining about how awful the food is and how much he misses his mom's cooking. You can hear a nurse talking about the situation in a field hospital, right? So I think with history, it's really about finding the personal and connecting across the decades and connecting across the centuries and realizing that we as people today are not much different than people were 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 400 years ago. People are people. And humans are humans, and maybe the technology around us has changed a little bit, but really who we are in essence as beings and as a species hasn't really changed. We still have many of the same concerns. So that's just, I think that might be helpful with that. There's one more question that I just saw, and then I think we might be coming close to time. So if you have anything else, put it in there right now. Otherwise, we'll be wrapping up soon. Sam asked, do you think the style of music chosen for Hamilton was more relatable or attractive to different audiences? Heck yes. Yes, Sam, you are 100% spot on. You nailed it. So a little bit of the marketing of the show as a hip hop musical was very much about trying to attract a different audience. They knew if they used that term hip hop or hip hop musical, first, it might attract some regular musical theater fans because they're like, what the heck does that mean? You can't bring hip hop into musical theater. So you'll get people who just come because well, that's not possible. It can't be right. But you also get people who love hip hop, who love popular music, who like Destiny's Child, who like 90s hip hop in particular, and they just think like, how I love this music, how is this going to work on stage? I don't understand how that's going to work. Also, because of the music and the way music is styled, movement and dance are integral in the storytelling. If you've only heard Hamilton and you haven't seen it yet, I can't, like, you have to pay the $6.99 to get Disney Plus and watch the show, because it is a dance show. It's like 2.5 hours of nonstop action and music. And I think that that use of popular music attracted a much younger audience, and also a more diverse audience than we typically see in a Broadway house or at a Broadway show. So great point, Sam. Really great point. There was a question a little bit earlier that I just want to touch on that I don't want to miss. Let's see. How do you know when a musical hits mainstream popularity like Hamilton? That's a great question. I think for me, when I realized it had sort of tipped was when my grandma, who was 87, asked me about it. Now, she's 87. She lives on the home farm, um, which is like an hour away from Madison. And to have my grandmother ask me about she likes musicals and she likes shows, but the fact that she wanted to have a conversation because she saw it on CBS Sunday Morning was like, oh wow, okay, this thing is getting bigger than Broadway. And then suddenly, once it was on CBS, which is a big national network, a lot of people who don't normally ask me about my work in theater or don't really have questions, they might come to a show, but they don't really have questions about how you make theater happen, had tons of questions. And the other big thing was it took Ron Chernow's book, his 700-page Brick, and made it a bestseller. Now, when is the last time? And if I can find it, I don't have it handy, but on the book itself, there's a big sticker of the Hamilton logo that says the basis of the Tony Award-winning musical, Hamilton, American Musical. I don't know of any other history book where they put a sticker of the musical on the cover to try to sell more books. So that was definitely a way that I also knew that it hit mainstream with that. So it looks like we're just about out of time. So thank you so much for tuning in today. If you're interested in talking more, you can always look me up in the WISC EDU directory and send me an email. I'd love to chat more. And if you have any more questions, you can also send an email as well. With that in mind, thank you so much, everybody, for being here for part of the Badger Talks Family and Parent Weekend. It was great to be here with you and great to talk about Hamilton on a lovely Saturday afternoon. So thank you again and have a wonderful, wonderful day.